morning, everybody. Glad you made it. Final day. If you're not fatigued by now, we hope to wake you up this morning. So the next session is going to be about AI in the role of entertainment and storytelling, but particularly with interactive entertainment and storytelling. And the format this morning, we're going to have two talks, short presentations by Gadney of Charisma.ai and then Laura Harrison of the BBC, and then we're going to go into a panel discussion with a few more guests. So welcome in Laura first.
Hello everyone. So I'm Laura Harrison from BBC Research and Development, and today Guy and I are hopefully going to try and answer the question that is AI making storytelling more interactive? And I'll talk a bit about some of the things we've been experimenting with in R&D, what challenges we faced, and what we've learned right through from exploration to testing. And there's so many things I could have talked about today, but I managed to narrow it down to just 3 content areas. And those are news and factual, object-based experiences, and drama and storytelling. So what do I mean when I'm talking about AI in this context? So firstly, and most commonly, I mean sort of machines that have been fed big data sets where they can understand the differences and anomalies and surface points of interest to the user. But secondly, I mean the progression of machine intelligence technologies such as branching narrative that sort of moved us from more of a lean back and absorb approach to a lean forward and play experience. So lastly, beyond that, the machine intelligence, how can it add value to the experiences in some way? So back to my 3 examples. The first is just in news and factual. So recently, BBC News Labs have been experimenting in something called semi-automated journalism with local news services. So people today know more about what's happening in their local communities because of social media, obviously. But sustaining local news has become increasingly a bit more of a struggle because of this. So the team at BBC News Labs wanted to ask the question of, could AI help them in creating more relevant stories for local audiences with adapting expectations? So they used huge big data sets from the NHS for this. As you can see, this is part of the process pipeline. So they take the data sets from the NHS, then using natural language generation, they create a story for every local NHS trust. Then there's also an automatically generated graphic for each story. And usually this process takes a few months, so being able to create generic templates has made this a huge step forward. And then it's just up to the journalist to then verify the story, which is the most important bit, before publishing to audiences. So obviously there are challenges here and some interesting questions before the team got started. You know, will journalists be comfortable in publishing stories that they haven't actually written themselves? And will audiences actually be happy reading stories that were compiled by machines? And there are some sensitivities, as we know, about what AI means in this area around trust, particularly with the rise of deep fakes and the spread of misinformation. But we've learned that whilst people are increasingly ready to experiment with new technology, that machines cannot replace the craft of curating and structuring and telling good stories. We definitely need humans for that, but AI can certainly help. So semi-automated journalism, although is a far more lean-back approach to AI and storytelling, has had an impact on the audiences by potentially allowing us to create more localized and relevant content for the audience that we couldn't perhaps have done before. So the second of the examples is around object-based experiences. This notion that everything within a story and its telling is atomic by default, so that it can be broken down into bits, into objects, into components that, when is automatically reassembled using machine intelligence, can offer a more interactive and personalized experience for the audience. So imagine if AI could understand all the variables about you as a user. So where you are, what device you're using, whether you're in the car, on the train, or at home, whether you're on a 20-minute commute or you're killing time on a Saturday afternoon. And it took all of those variables and it automatically served you a story that's fulfilled the elements either for a lean-back experience or for a more interactive experience. So machines can enable more adaptive storytelling by understanding both implicit and explicit personalization. So, for example, I like drama versus location services detecting that I'm on a particular street that can be used in a drama. So definitely ways for more experimentation and interaction. So for this particular experiment, our challenge was to try and make complex tasks a lot more easily understood. And we did it through a make-along origami frog, which is quite fun. So in the initial user testing of a sort of linear instruction, we found that the instructor was quite hard to follow at speed, and this made people quite stressed. Following one camera angle was really hard, and the language is quite insistent, sometimes a bit repetitive, so people gave up a lot quicker. So instead, we added some variables, whether that's multi-camera views or ways to repeat steps. It meant that more audiences were able to digest the information and carry out the task, therefore interacting more playful with the content. So breaking things down into objects that can be reassembled due to varying personalized factors is highly more interactive and enjoyable for audiences. So the third example I'd like to talk about is drama and making fictitious stories more playful using AI. So here we have the Inspection Chamber, which is an interactive sci-fi comedy drama, and it uses voice interactions with Alexa in a branching narrative format where you play you. And we wanted to go beyond the sort of transactional nature of a chatbot and look whether you can really interact with a machine in a story sense and taking off into entertainment areas and not seeing tech as a barrier to the story. So the main challenge with this experiment was mainly designing an experience that has thousands of variable outputs. And you can see here in the example of Orator, which is the tool that powers this experience, how 5 or 6 possible answers to a question could quite easily become very complex, a very complex task in story design. So how can AI help us with this challenge? So in this example, users were a lot more engaged with the interactions. Obviously, we're asking them to do more things, but the total users was relatively low. So we want to experiment a bit more in this particular non-transactional story format. And we'll talk about that, a bit more about that in a moment. I think Guy will expand particularly. So is AI making storytelling more interactive? It's certainly making interactions become easier for audiences to experience and making those experiences somewhat more compelling. However, we still need humans to craft these stories into something meaningful and of value. So beyond R&D work in AI, we work collaboratively with the industry through Connected Studio, stimulating the creative economy and partnering with experts to help us really scale our thinking. So over the past 7 years, we've partnered with startups and SMEs in the tech industry to enable us to sort of rapidly prototype new concepts and formats, but also test new technologies with BBC production teams. And last year, we put out a call to the industry for scalable and reusable storytelling tools that we could license and experiment in the field of adaptive and immersive storytelling, and building on those experiments beyond the transactional, as I've just talked about. So one of the partnerships that came from that was with Charisma.ai, and with that, I'll hand over to Guy.
Thank you. Thanks, Laura. So I'm just going to lead directly on from Laura, really, and just show you this morning a couple of things we're working on quickly, and then on the panel we can dive down into a bit more detail. So where we are with Charisma, we wanted to build a platform which the the BBC very handily summarized as sort of scalable, reusable storytelling technology, and built from scratch with storytelling in its DNA. And that's quite different from, standard chatbot technologies that you might see today, which in that transactional sense tend to be more search engine focused. And their goals are very much about getting you as the user in and out of the experience as fast as possible. That's a search engine. So say Alexa, tune to a certain radio station, you want that to happen fairly quickly. And largely that's the end of the experience. We want to take a different approach, which is very much more natural, which is around conversation. And in a conversation, you're not going A to B and back again. You're going A, B, C, D, E. And to make that natural was quite complex, which is why we ended up building this from scratch, from the core. And the first project we worked on with the BBC was a variant on Tomorrow's World. It was a futuristic look at an AI-powered taxi service. And the experience adapted based on your input. And it was a sort of moral code input. So if you answered the questions that we had in a certain way, then the experience would take you down a certain track. And if you went down a different way, then it would take you down a different track. I'm not sure if we can get the video playing that's behind this. It's on the next slide. Sorry, there we go.
Hold on, we're setting off.
Is that fun?
Yes.
Cool.
You have been invited to take part in a referendum.
Here we are in your perfect future.
Wow.
Hope you've enjoyed the journey.
All of my videos are about 5 seconds long, so don't worry too long. And the experience there taught us a couple of things. One, the UI was great, and it was immersive. It was sort of first person, and the conversation that was going had pace, had a sense of tension to it. If we took one learning out of it, it was that it's good to show the character. This was a sort of AI without a character. But that then leads into the second one. Hang on.
Hold on, we're setting.
Which is where we created a character. And our guy here was, we'd done a couple of experiences looking at emotionally engaging characters, and we did a perfect boyfriend and a perfect girlfriend. And then we decided to go a bit darker than that into this suspected serial killer. And the story is that he's walked into a police station and he wants to talk to you. And again, as Laura said, it's you. And with that, you start talking. And two things to pick up on here. One was that's video. So we integrated video into the interactive experience. And two, as you saw, he got angry. And you'll see emotion coming through in a couple of things that we can talk about in a minute. But the emotional angle of that character, again, breaks fully away from Alexa. And then finally, though, if you're looking at chatbots, generally people think of them in terms of one-to-one conversations. But that's not a story, and it's not drama. You need to have a sort of broader cast in that space. So what we're working on at the moment is now an adaptation of an immersive theatre production set in World War II. It's got a whole cast and just a little sort of taster of this.
Before proceedings begin, I would like to be the first person to congratulate the newly appointed Prime Minister on their promotion.
So it's like sort of it's work in progress, but again, 3D, that's now 3D avatars and animation, multiple characters, you're in a room and you're in part of that space. Leading in to the next session, I just wanted to put things in three contexts around character, conversation, and context, which is where we spend a lot of our time looking. The character is personality. You have to have that because that's how we engage as humans. Mood states, a cast of stars, you want to have that. This is about storytelling. And again, if you want to have something which is very much an Alexa experience, that's great, and that's more probably call center type things. But our view is that if you're starting from storytelling, then you need to do something different, and that's more of the Charisma experience that we're building. Conversation, you can see themes, super important. Story branches, multi-device as an output, and the context of it. So you need to be able, we never want to have anyone in our experiences have an answer of, I'm sorry, I don't understand that. That should never happen, because it doesn't happen in Star Wars, it doesn't happen in Harry Potter, and it should never happen with us. So next phase of what we're looking at, and maybe we'll pick up some of these themes, are emotion, complex to do this, but again, it's part of the whole bringing things to life and the experience to life. The virtual immersion, maybe we'll touch on VR if people are interested, and automation. I'm currently doing a fellowship with a bunch of universities in the southwest of England around automation. One-liner, AI is here, but actually it's a sort of cause and effect. The effect is going to be automation, which has more of a philosophical approach to it. So with that, I think I'll pass over to Sharm back again. Thank you.
I'm going to ask you a quick question.
Okay.
So right now, the examples that you showed us there are B2C. So as a user, we can go and see these interactions in real life and play with them or go online. But a lot of your work is B2B, right? Is that the work that you did with the BBC? So what I'm thinking about is there are several levels where humans can either accept or reject the story. You have writers who are writing these lines who might say, that doesn't seem right, the AI didn't get it right. You then have actors or characters, if they are real humans, they can reject it again and say, my character wouldn't say this. And then finally, to me, you have like the audience who would be like, this would never happen in the story. So I'm interested in what your success rate is, or how you're developing these three human barriers in entertainment and storytelling, and what your experience is of that.
So the short answer is, and really to echo something Laura was saying, it's about the writers, it's about creativity. Charisma is not an automatic writing tool. It's a way to make the writer's job, which is writing complex narratives, easier. And the magic in what we do is actually interpreting what the user's saying and interpreting it in a way that feels natural and makes sense and brings people into the story. So that's sort of the third part of the question. It makes the user feel a sense of surprise that the experience they're getting is relevant to what they've just said. And I think that's the context piece. But, there is the debate over the next few weeks and months is going to be about automatic writing properly. And if you want a clue as to when that's going to happen, it's going to be July the 1st, and it's going to be with the potential release of GPT-2. So research that and you'll hear it's insane. And that will trigger the whole conversation about it. Our view is and always will be that that the creative industries are, we're creating stories for humans. And with that, we have our own sort of micro emotions that we need to bring to this. And so the writers, for us, are the most important piece in the mix, because they're the ones who can tell the stories in the best way.
Awesome. And with that, I'd like to invite the rest of my panel. Could you come and take a seat up here? Oop. Morning, guys. So let's just kick off by having some introductions, who you are, what you do, and what you're working on.
Hi, I'm Emily Short. I'm Chief Product Officer at Spirit.ai. And Spirit really came into being to serve the game space in a couple of different ways. The way that is relevant to this panel is that we work on a product called Character Engine, which is about developing characters who can interact through natural language or through other interactions that are happening in a game space. So you could imagine a character who needs to respond to the players just killed somebody in front of them. So creating tools that let people author really responsive narrative experiences around the complexities of both the player input and the development of the story world.
Good morning, thank you very much for having me. I'm Isabel Perry and I work at a company called Byte, which is a marketing technology agency. Byte brings together data, media, creative, and tech, and I head up the tech team. We do a lot of work with chatbots and augmented reality for brands like Spotify, ASOS, Victoria Beckham. And I think it was interesting hearing Guy talk about transactional chatbots, because we do transactional chatbots and conversational chatbots. And some of the work that we do around that is sort of almost impersonating real people in order to market their services or products. So we created a chatbot that was speaking on behalf of Victoria Beckham. We created chatbots that are speaking on musicians on behalf of Spotify. And with augmented reality, we build tools, or we see it that we build tools for other people to build their own stories in 10 seconds if it's on social, or for longer experiences on web.
Yep. Hi everybody, my name's Steve Worswick. I'm a senior AI developer at Pandorabots.com. Which is probably the oldest and most popular chatbot building platform in the world. There's over 60 billion messages being processed by our bots. We currently have over 250,000 developers on there. My current work, and something I've been working on for about 15 years now, is a chatbot called Mitsuku. This is just a general conversational chatbot. It doesn't have a business goal, it's just there for people to talk to. Kind of like the general intelligence of, like a C3PO or Kit from Knight Rider, that kind of thing. People talk to it for fun. I'm fortunate enough that it's won 4 Loebner Prizes, which is like the equivalent of the World Cup, the Oscars for chatbots. So it's currently recognised as being the world's most conversational AI.
And I'm Guy. What we're working on at the moment is quite interesting. Is what I didn't show was we're adapting John Wyndham's sci-fi book, The Kraken Wakes, into this medium, and that I think is sort of one of the biggest challenges we face. So literally, that's what the team is doing today.
Awesome. So let's start with character, because all of you build and develop characters, and characters that can tell stories. With interactions, a lot of the existing products are, a two-way connection. Have you guys thought about how you would build things with multiple, a mass amount of people interacting with one thing at the same time?
Yes. So one of the use cases for Character Engine is in games that are designed to be multiplayer, where you've got lots of players running around a world. Traditionally, authors for this space find themselves challenged to create enough varied content that different players have different experiences in the game world, and there's something for them to talk about and discuss. So one of the areas that we're interested in is creating characters who actually can develop a personalized relationship with the individual people who are interacting with them. So that means the character remembers things about how you specifically have treated them. They develop different kind of personality attitudes towards you than they might towards another player. And that means that if you have multiple players interacting with the same character, you might see that character treating different people differently depending on their kind of backstory. So that's one area where you can see kind of an evolution that is interactive over a long period of time and responds to kind of different player contribution.
Steve, have you thought about people speaking to Mitsuku across different people? So if my son was talking to her, would she be able to then talk to me about him?
No. Everything's totally...
But that would be cool.
Well, maybe for some people. No, it's all totally confidential. I don't know who anybody is. All I get is a customer ID number. And the sole purpose for that is so that it can keep context of conversations, because it's not unusual for it to have, a few thousand conversations all at the same time. Mm-hmm. I don't know where anybody's from, any personal details, apart from what the users are willing to share with the bot. The bot will never ask them, things like credit card details and things like that, obviously, but it will ask them, what's your name? Just so, it's like in normal conversation, you would ask what someone's name is, and it helps the conversation flow. But those details are never shared amongst anybody. I use them to improve the bots, but I would never think of sharing. If someone said, what did this last person say, it would probably just make something up. I can't do anything like that.
Yeah, of course. When it comes to putting emotion into characters, how do you define and go about building that emotion? Well, how do you define emotion in AI? Because I feel like emotion is a term that we take for granted because we have it. But how do you define it in a machine setting?
It's all very much kind of bluff and trickery, really. A lot of people who talk to these things, they do genuinely think it's alive. You know, a lot of people have only experience of AI and robots is from watching Star Trek and Knight Rider and things like that. And they expect the bot to be on that kind of level, which simply isn't possible.
Hollywood ruined it for all of us, didn't they?
It did, yes.
Set expectations too high.
It did. So the way I've got it is it's very much, as it's developed over the years, it's kind of taken on a lot of my persona. So I can keep it kind of like a consistent personality rather than having to try and remember, does it like bacon sandwiches and things like that. So to keep it like an emotional level, it treats you the same way you treat it. So if you're very nice to it and you're polite to it, it'll be polite back to you. If you start insulting it or being mean, the bot will be mean back to you, which I think is a fairly human trait. And so it reacts to people like that. It tries not to get angry with people unless they are angry with them.
Isabel, how did you find actually you had a real human to start with Victoria Beckham? So how did you understand and read her emotional temperament and her emotional intelligence and then transfer that to a machine?
Luckily, we had an incredible guy called Hugh in the office who's 23 and read nothing but Victoria Beckham commentary for about 2 weeks. And everything that went through the door went past Hugh, and he became the voice of Victoria Beckham. I think it's probably a lot easier when you are impersonating a real person, because people are probably more willing to believe that it does have emotions. But your previous question, what's quite scary is the degree to which, even when you've said this is a robot, this is a chatbot, I'm not a human, repeatedly, people are desperately keen to connect emotionally. And so on every bot that we've ever built, which is speaking on behalf of a real person, people will say, here's my number, call me to show it's a real person. Or can you send a photo of where you are right now so I can show my wife? I can't believe I'm talking to the real you. And it doesn't matter what age range the target audience is or who the person is, and it's really dangerous. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm very pro on the state of California is trying to introduce a rule that any chatbot needs to declare it's a chatbot. And I think it should go further and say it's a chatbot built by this organization because of that emotional magic which people seek out.
So you didn't actually meet Victoria?
No, she's very busy.
But just thinking about that, building a persona for someone who you haven't had any human interaction with, how do you construct a team? Like, what does Hugh do in your team, for example? How do you construct a team that can read this information, then take that it is data, turn it into a conversational form when, if you have psychology or philosophy or all of these type of backgrounds, how are you thinking about how you transfer a real person into a machine without meeting them? Do you not ever worry about misrepresentation?
Because we weren't speaking on behalf of Victoria Beckham, the individual mother, wife, friend, we were speaking on Victoria Beckham, the fashion designer who wants to speak about her collection, was doing a lot of marketing around London Fashion Week and had things that she wanted to say. We were not in a position where we were in danger of, we weren't required to tap into that side of it, and it would have been inappropriate in our role if we had tried to reflect that.
So it had a very specific purpose?
Yeah.
Emily, when there is no specific purpose apart from playing a game, how do you build this 360-degree character, like Isabel said, not just Victoria Beckham, the businesswoman, but the wife and the mother, and I also was in a band and I was a child star and actually had a very pushy family and all of this stuff. Because that's the thing that I'm interested in with character design. It's like when you meet another human, you're reading them from the minute. Before you've even actually met them, you hear their name, and that name, Emily, means something very different to Sharmadean. are reading them visually from head to toe, you're thinking, where did you study? Where did you grow up? And all of these we're processing so quickly and building an idea of who this person is. So when you don't have a specific purpose, for example, with your characters, how do you tell that story? Because to me, that story is, for me, 35 years of, of journaling.
So that actually depends quite a lot on the needs of the story. And one of the things that I think about quite frequently is that telling a story well is actually kind of a teaching process. And so I tend to think in terms of like, what are the top things that I need this person to understand about the story in order for them to even appreciate it at all. And those kind of drive what the kind of key character moments are. So depending on, is this more of a drama, is it more of a thriller, whatever, I can identify there are these things that really need to come across. And so those become things that should be reflected in the character's speech, in their actions, in the sort of the more handcrafted moments that are occurring in the narrative. And then you can kind of step down a level or two below that and say, I'm going to also, as an author, throw in a little bit of added detail. And then when you get to the kind of the bottom layer of things that really feel quite arbitrary, where it's kind of like it doesn't actually matter from an artistic perspective what the answer to this question is, but somebody might ask, so what am I going to do about that? That's where we actually start to get into using a little bit of just-in-time content generation, where the system may actually not have an answer to that until somebody asks, and then it'll pick something that seems plausible based on what else we know and put it in place.
But I would say it's those arbitrary details that make it the most human. Do you know what I mean? So, for example, if you, I just watched Chernobyl last night, if any of you guys have been overwhelmed by this incredible drama, and then I read some real life storytelling by people who were like age 3, 4, 5, and their memories of that. So, for example, a character who has been through something like that might have mistrust for government, high environmental, like the environment is really important to them. So then wouldn't it be cool in the story if they constantly carried around a reusable water bottle instead of drinking water? I feel like it's those little details that make the story really, really special. Guy, I was going to ask, do you want to say something to that? No.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, so thinking about memory and history and someone's entire human experience, how do you think about reacting to world events that are happening now? Because you had a spy one. Did you tell me you were going to not do a Brexit one? No. Nothing to do with Brexit, but that could be one. But do you think about how characters and stories are impacted by global events in real time?
Yeah, and it's actually quite, the answer to that's quite prosaic. But just to pick up on that last piece as well about character, AI can generate content, but in the storytelling world, we would never get away with it. If we're dealing with, and it's not a real world example before anyone thinks, but if we were dealing with Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling, there is no way that a single word would get out in that project if it had not been written by her. AI could not generate it. Similarly, if an AI cannot generate a Rembrandt, whatever anyone says, it's not a Rembrandt. By definition, a Rembrandt is a Rembrandt. And as you said, everything that came, in his history, every element that came up into create that piece of art is a Rembrandt. And I think we need to sort of move away from this trend of applying AI to art and creativity, because it's not helpful. As regards memory, we're actually just about to complete a year-long research project into the impact of memory on storytelling. And again, it's quite simple, which is that if you have a book, that book doesn't know when you're reading it whether you're crying or whether you're laughing. Similarly, neither does a TV show or even any other sort of linear medium. But in our world, it does. We do know that. Sorry. And that's interesting, because for a storyteller, it's not just about knowing your name, but it's remembering to a certain degree of accuracy. And let's say we were in a drama where I choose to misremember what you've said. That has a big impact on the storytelling. So I think within the way that we're looking at things, the memory is important, and then the real world is easy. I mean, that's the easy bit, which is we can bring in feeds from latest football scores from the weather and geolocate that into the storyline. And that then brings it's a moment of surprise, always. Because
not that we're trying to make the characters feel real, but we're trying to create that sense of surprise. And that, to me, is actually the essence of what makes a good story, you know, because surprise is unbelievably difficult to do in a story. Surprise implies the huge amount of context setting up and judging all the micro movements in you, and then suddenly going, you know, and then twisting it. So it's almost the essence of what is being human.
I think the judging of the micro movements, and like we said, this panel is about interactivity. Knowing how you're reacting as the story is unfolding or as the experience is unfolding, I think is critical to keeping it as engaging as possible. Steve, do you have any plans in the future to integrate video or any sensory elements so that your bots can really, really read how the user is reacting through non-verbal communication?
At the moment, it is purely a text-based bot. It can display images and videos, but it can't take in, you know, camera feeds and develop, you know, attitudes from that.
But would you like to?
Yes, because a lot of it is, you know, non-verbal communication. People, as you just said, you know, we don't just speak to it. You know, it's hard to detect sarcasm from just purely text. So if you can see someone sort of rolling their eyes and things like that, that'd be great to get involved with. Unfortunately, I don't have the technological skills to work with, you know, the computer vision side of things, but it would be really useful. You could tell when people were getting bored. You could get them to, you know, the bot could change it onto a different subject, and I think that is probably, you know, the future. It'd be great to get two-way interaction rather than just a purely text-based, like on an old telephone type conversation.
Isabel, tell me about how people in this two-way conversation leave feeling. Have you had feedback from users with Victoria Becker in terms of what is the end result of their emotion after going through the process? I know you said that people believed, you know, they wanted to take selfies, but was there an underlying thing? In Guy's example with the suspect, we saw a lot of anger and like mistrust and kind of an unnerving of that person's emotional state. What did you find from your Beckham? How was Vicky Beckham affecting people?
I think the reality is when we design conversations to be ongoing, so actually they often don't have an ending because the conversations we're developing are around an initial experience, but then how do we retain them to maintain that conversation on behalf of the brands? And that's also the way that when we analyze real human conversations, if you look at your WhatsApp messages right now, you'll very rarely say bye anymore, or you'll very rarely say I've got to go. And actually we're building conversations without ends a lot of the time. I'd also say that of this panel, like this is the most amazingly emotionally sophisticated panel of conversation designers, and ours are probably not in that same space yet because it is for marketing instead of for gaming or for storytelling in such a depth way.
Actually, that's a really interesting question. How are your teams, I think it'd be really useful for the room to understand how your teams are constructed and how do you build a team around emotion and conversation and human, because there is so many things being set up to get girls into STEM and to get more people into AI. But I would argue that humanities, linguistics, psychology, philosophy, all of these subjects are actually equally as important to the role of building AI. Could you tell me a bit more about your team, Emily?
Sure. So our team, because we're actually building a tool set as well as, you know, actually finished pieces, we have a set of engineers who are working on kind of the tech of the simulation, running the characters' interactions. And then we also have contributions from a data science team, which is looking at how do we do the natural language understanding, but also things like how are particular personality traits reflected in how people speak, things like how can we read that from people's input, what are sort of the meanings attached to things other than regular speech, so people sometimes try and communicate via emoji and things like that. So we have a spread of those kinds of resources, and then we also have some people who work with us, with our clients, to help do proofs of concept and build initial pieces of content. And those people often are coming from a writing background or a writing for games background, so they have some experience in interactivity, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're trained programmers.
We have a slightly similar team. It's developers, conversation designers. We're lucky to have sort of stand-up comedians on the team, and we have a guy with a PhD in language studies. And a lot of people in the team aren't coming at it from working in this space already, so we're still working out ways in which we work together, if I'm honest. Some people are really good at natural language processing, but then they're trying to educate someone that's literally only been a writer for a year into how they can think about these conversational concepts. And the way that we approach it at the moment is we're looking at a lot of like the last 75 years of language studies to understand what does make a good conversation if you look at Greece's maxims, but we're also looking at our real human conversations and saying, this was important, this was literally just fluff. Let's gather up all the fluff. How do we incorporate that into the next chatbot that we build, which is speaking on behalf of a podcaster, which is one of the projects we're working on right now, in order to make these conversations as natural as possible.
Yeah, so we have a similar kind of thing again. We have the tech.
What did you study, Steve?
What did I study?
Yeah.
What, in regards to
Just
AI?
in life.
Nothing. I'm no university degree.
And you've been doing this for 15 years. It's so cool. Tell us how you got there.
Oh, thank you. I've always been interested in these sort of things from watching, as we said, Knight Rider and Star Trek and that. But when I was a boy, obviously we had no computer power to be able to create anything like this. What I did used to do just as a hobby was to, in the entertainment world again, was to make dance and techno music, all the kind of boom, boom, boom rubbish that you hear. And what I found was one of my fellow producers, he had a chatbot on his website. And I thought, oh, this is really cool. And it just brought all my childhood memories flooding back. And I decided to put one on my music website. But unfortunately, what I found was more people were coming to listen to talk to the chatbot than were to listen to the music. So I kind of took that as a bit of a hint and just continued working on the chatbot. And, it got to the stage where people were just talking to about anything and everything and just gave me so much room for it to grow. And started entering in competitions, it started winning, and I thought, this is really, really cool. Got involved heavily with Pandorabots, and I'm now kind of doing this as a full-time thing,
And how's your team constructed around your bot?
Yeah, so for working on Mitsuko itself, it's me. There's the techie guys who make sure the platform's running, but all the content, all the conversational log checking and the NLP side of it is all done by myself. I don't use like an NLP tool as such. I've created kind of all that sort of thing myself. A lot of people say to me, why didn't I use something like machine learning rather than a rule-based system? And the answer is because I've yet to see a chatbot that's any good that's been created in any other method. I have total control, and it's, I avoid the sort of things you see on the news where there was a PayPal bot and someone said to it, oh, I've been scammed, and the bot said, oh, good for you, or something like that. And all those kind of things do slip through. Luckily, I'm not sort of like representing a brand like Victoria Beckham or anything like that. So I kind of have carte blanche to pretty much put in anything there that I feel. And if people do kind of get annoyed by it, I mean, there's a lot of views in there about Brexit and Trump and all that kind of thing. I can just get away with the excuse of, it's just what the computers said, and kind of pass it on.
It's actually crazy to think that the most award-winning bot is not powered by machine learning. Can we just have a moment for that? Do you know what I mean? We have an entire conference about AI and the human's still winning.
Yes, I mean, when I started, it's taken me, as I say, 15 years to get to this point. But when I started 15 years ago, people were saying, you will not be able to make a chatbot that's rule-based. It's impossible. You'll be doing it for years. And yeah, okay, I've been doing it for years. But then,
but you built the best one.
But I built the best one. And, these same people are still looking for shortcuts and machine learning. Let's just feed it lots of data and hope it works. And, I'm kind of sitting there and laughing with a string of medals around my neck. So.
Guy, tell us about how your team is constructed.
Well, I'm going to answer the same question that you asked Steve, really, which is But to context, I think we're starting to see two different types emerging. One is very informational, and that's great. And as I talked about, if you've got a lot of information and you can surface that up, great. If you want something that is more engaging, properly engaging, on a human, and it feels like a human, that's different. It's a completely different experience. I studied Spanish and philosophy, and you know what? I didn't know why at the time, and now I know why, because it's about language. It's about understanding different people's perspectives and thinking about it. And I was very lucky to have sort of done that, and I use it more in my day-to-day than anything else. Because ultimately, what I'm doing is and all our teams are very small, and we spin up like a film studio, right? So it's a core team that thinks about all this stuff, and then if we've got a big project, then we bring in the writers, we bring in the designers, we bring in partnerships with different companies and all sorts of stuff. So we're quite cut from that cloth rather than anything else, but it's about, it's about being human again, and I totally agree with Steve. You can over tech stuff, and the trouble about it is that you have intended consequences of overtaking stuff, and you have unintended consequences of overtaking stuff. Microsoft Tay, unintended consequences of overtaking stuff. GPT-2, unintended consequences of overtaking stuff. So I think, to maintain control of the narrative is to maintain control of the characters, like with Isabel and sort of Victoria Beckham. You can't have her say something that's not her.
Yeah.
It would kill the business, and the same with anything else.
So you've said something earlier that leads me really nicely to my next question about film studios. So if we change tack a little bit and think about business models for entertainment, business models for using AI in storytelling, we've seen a lot of democratization of producing content. Everyone has tools now to do so. But there are still these big film studios that hold the power with the majority of the content that we see in terms of stories. How do you see a future for this either becoming more or breaking down? Do you think that AI studios will replace film studios in the future?
Well, just quickly to pick up on that, I think you're starting to see that. You could argue with Amazon and Netflix. Netflix is dominant power at the moment in a lot of ways, and it's the Bandersnatch moment. I mean, thank God for Bandersnatch. It cuts short every presentation I do by 20 minutes because I can just go, hey, Bandersnatch, and I don't need to explain the history of Choose Your Own Adventure.
Choose Your Own Adventure storytelling.
Exactly. But where that's different to what we do is that if you've played it, it's remote control, right? You're in control of the story. You're not in the story. And one is outside and one is inside. And I think what we do is actually when you're inside the experience, and as that starts to, the impact, the strength of what we're doing, it starts to sort of filter out. You'll start to see, and you know what? It's also the games industry.
Yeah, I was literally going to go through everyone's industry. Your industry is very different, but in games and, to be honest, in advertising, do you feel that you're now competing with a different type of organisation who might fear your the way that you can automate the work that would take them months to do? You can start, Isabel. So, for example, are you now competing with traditional film, TV, production companies for experiences that are around storytelling? Because that budget for the Victoria Beckham would previously have gone to something else, a TV spot or an ad campaign.
Yes, we are. Byte London's lucky because we are quite good at embracing technology. But when you hear things like, on an operational level, YouTube has created an AI which will cut down a 2-minute film trailer to 6 seconds to create the YouTube bumper. That is many companies around the world. That's what they do.
They just create trailers. So imagine a whole industry being wiped out.
Yeah,
because
or at
we
least
can now
the
cut it down.
adaptation for the digital placement of that. And then if you think about a lot of what we do is paid media, which is buying the ads, but we now just use a platform which is called Smartly. It's really good. And they use AI to optimize and target all of their ads. That is even more companies that are going to be wiped out. And you can already see the impact that that's having on some of the largest holding companies. And then from a production level, I think there is a company called Phrasey, for example, which is using AI to generate subject lines, originally an email, and now they're using it to create social copy. Again, that's more agencies being wiped out. So we're trying to embrace it as fast as we can, but it's already having a huge effect on the industry, absolutely, in every way, operationally, production, distribution, every single element that you can think of.
Emily, how will Character Engine transform your traditional industry model?
So in the game industry, the challenge is often to create a story that is giving the player as much agency as possible. So you go into the game world, you do a few things, you want to see the characters responding to that, you want to see consequences to that playing out throughout the story. But the amount of that game studios can do is often limited by the amount of writing talent they have available, and the amount of time that they're able to put in, not just to actually composing the dialogue, but doing animation, doing voice, all of those kinds of things. And so Character Engine and indeed other advances in this space are leveraging what's possible to do with human writers in order to make the games that are produced that much richer, that much more engaging, have that many more ways to respond. And we see the piece that we're doing, which is about that kind of character creation, really pairing with some of the other advances that are happening. So for instance, improved text-to-speech, having text-to-speech characters that can deliver things in an emotional way, that goes together nicely with what we're doing. So it's not so much about replacing teams in the game industry, it's about expanding what they're even able to do. And then probably also bringing some of those techniques and possibilities to other industries, because we're also having a lot of conversations with people in entertainment outside of games, robotics, education, enterprise chatbots, all of those kinds of things are interested in how do we do this kind of generative text storytelling in other contexts.
I think the gaming industry as a whole has created so many innovations for the entire world that actually you're always at the forefront of stuff. We've just got a few minutes left, so I'd like to wrap up by asking you guys to tell me about which user interface or platform you're most excited about for storytelling. Do you still think we'll be on our phones? Do you think that there are other ways? What user face or platform are you most excited about for interactive storytelling?
The one for me with the chatbots interaction is probably virtual reality. I think that's going to be the next huge thing. We're still pretty much in the early stages, but the things I've seen kind of develop over the last few years, are incredible, and like these sort of lifelike avatars. And instead of, having a texting in or just speaking, you actually see the person in front of you and it reacts. And I think the whole way of interacting with characters is going to change dramatically through that. I also think the smart speakers as well, the things like the Alexa and the Google Home, are going to play a huge place in interaction. There's competition at the moment, Alexa Prize, where you have to try and create a chatbot that can carry on a 20-minute conversation. And
are you entering it?
I'm not allowed to.
Good.
No, unfortunately it's only for universities, and so I'm long past that, I'm afraid. But yeah, no, that kind of interaction, it's going to be the way forwards, definitely. I still think our phones, because everyone carries a phone around with us, but I don't know, maybe 10, 20 years we're going to be all in a dystopian society where everyone's just sat at home with the VR goggles on and just talking to some random
What about
thing.
just thinking it?
Oh, well, that would be scary, yeah, especially some of the things that people talk to my chatbot about. I don't think I want to know what they're thinking about.
Guy, what do you think is the next big platform or user interface?
Well,
or one that's underrated?
I think underrated is probably VR. I agree with Steve. I think, and by the way, I think, for Amazon to set a bar of 20 minutes is astonishingly low. The Suspect was a 2.5-hour experience. The stuff we were seeing with Perfect Boyfriend, Perfect Girlfriend, they were averaging 20 minutes, and some were 6 hours of sessions. 20 minutes is low as a bar. The reason I think VR is interesting is because it's a much more intimate medium than I think people give it credit for. Every new medium has a roller coaster in it. Cinema.
Of hype.
Yeah.
Everyone's talking about it, then everyone's a bit bored of it.
No. I mean, literally, there is a roller coaster.
Oh, an actual roller coaster.
When film started, they shoved a camera on a roller coaster. And so VR has the roller coaster. But, you know, when I'm on a roller coaster, I don't do that. I'm like, but I think, you know, more intimate things, more intimate experiences which are a lot slower, and, you know, it plays to conversation, I think, really nicely in characters. So I do think VR, I mean, again, then you get AR and all of those, but I think there's a bit of magic there still to be found.
Isabel?
I think it's the smartphone, because the smartphone combines messaging, augmented reality. With 5G coming, it will have VR without the lag. Pretty much all of the emerging technology interfaces that we have work on a mobile phone, and it's with us all the time. And storytelling is getting shorter and shorter and more regularly, but shorter moments.
Emily, which gaming company do you think are the most receptive to this type of interaction in storytelling?
Well, I think there's companies that are working in the AR and VR space really get the understanding of why we need to interact with the character with natural language. But even more traditional sort of console game companies are very invested in the idea of just making experiences where the characters remember the player. It's a huge deal, and every time I talk to anybody at studios, they're like, can we have characters that remember if you cheated them, if you lied to them? Like, there's a lot of designer excitement about what's possible.
That's really cool. Last thing on the intimacy part, I know we've got to end actually, I'll wrap up just by saying, I am not sure if entertainment should be purely intimate one-on-one. One of the best things about being entertained is a shared collective experience where we're all consuming media together but having a personalised experience. I would set that challenge to you guys, is to create a large-scale collective experience that is intimately personalised for the individual. Thank you so much, guys. Well done.